Hello, my name's Aaron Haba. I'm about to show you a brief explanation of moment theory. Just to give you a background history, this all started from a dream. I kind of awoke in a cold sweat, and I had a dream that if I created this experiment, I would somehow be able to create free energy. And of course, when I woke up, I realized the experiment just involved mirrors, lasers, and wood. So it kind of became apparent that that was not the solution, and that I wasn't going to discover exactly free energy. But what I did discover is basically a metaphysical link between time and light, proving that at some point in the universal creation, light and time were bonded together by some sort of creator, or whatever you would like to imagine it as, a god. So, with that in mind, what I'm about to tell you is once you see this knowledge, you can't really unknow it. So, just keep that in mind as you're going to watch this video. If you're not ready for that sort of thing, I don't suggest to keep watching it. So here we have a shot that's panned out of the entire experiment, minus the cat. As you can see, it's made out of wood, two mirrors, a laser, and an equilateral triangle. Anybody can make this. In order to create it, I used a table saw to cut in these notches and then slide the mirrors in, and as you can see, the mirrors run parallel to themselves down through there. We have two reflective mirrors. So to imagine this experiment, we must first know that the distance between these two mirrors here, back to back, is represented by x. We also then have a source, which can be seen as the laser, represented by the electron, the proton, and the neutron. That would be three parts of a source. And then we also have another source, which is an equilateral triangle, a 60, a 60, and a 60. So I also set up a control for this experiment by using a 150 milliwatt laser. For this purpose, I am only using a 5 milliwatt laser because I found that I get the exact same results, and the light is in fact limited by the geometry of this experiment rather than the milliwattage of the laser itself. Now, when I first turn this laser on, I'm just going to have it reflect once off of the mirrors here so you can get an idea of what's happening. You can see clearly by the equilateral triangle that it is in fact creating an equilateral triangle by the beam of the light. It's landing at approximately a distance of a full equilateral triangle from this point down here. So when I first started this experiment, I thought it was going to reflect 108 times down this parallel mirror and then create free energy. But what I found, in fact, it is limited to 49 reflections, regardless of the milliwattage of the laser or the accuracy of this experiment. Because as you can see, it is clearly parallel and basically as accurate as you can get it to a measurement. Now, the curve that results from this experiment, you can see clearly as day. I am not creating that curve. Light is in fact doing it upon itself. And you can see that it's coming back to a point that is right in line with itself. And at the 49th reflection, it seemingly just disappears. I mean, you can clearly see that there is no other light coming out this other side of the experiment. Or else it would be definitely shining down here on this wood. Now, to show you what is going on here at the 42nd reflection, I have made a way to open it up to show you that, in fact, at the 42nd reflection, light starts to do this peculiar phenomenon here, where it almost looks as though it is in two parts. To me, that looks like the event horizon of a black hole starting, because clearly when I shut the mirror and trap the light, then it no longer comes out. But yet, there's that curve. So you might ask, what's the significance of this curve and what does this all mean? So in order to find out, I took measurements and I started to calculate the radius of this curved geometry, and what I found was pretty astonishing. So let's take a look. So if we think about this curve as having a segment width of 49x as shown here, we also found by measurement of this experiment that the height of the arc was in fact half of x. When we calculate the radius based off of the entire circle of this arc, we find that the radius is equal to 600.5x. Now, I didn't tell you about the variable y, but I can show you here very simply by allowing you to see the top of the curve again. Y is the distance between each one of these reflections, which in fact turns out to be a metaphysical value of half of x. So when we look at this entire curve based on the unit of measure of y, we find that there are in fact 98y, the distance of the laser, which is going to represent the width of the segment. And in turn, if we're using the measurement unit of y, we also have to account for that here. So we allow that to be 1y for the height of the curve. And what we result in is a radius of 1201x. Now, this is kind of a little bit more complicated than the rest of the experiment, but what we find is that the point of contact actually must be 97y, because in creating the metaphysical value of y, what we did was we added value to the experiment that actually really wasn't there, because we know that y can only be defined once we define x, and x is a set distance defined by the width between the mirrors. So y is really a metaphysical value, so we must at least subtract one value from this because of that fact. So we'll find that the point of the resource, which is in fact the end of the laser beam, is at 97y. So in subtracting the 1 from also the radius, we are given that we can't calculate the radius, so we must go back to the most logical point, which is the apothem of this radius. And that apothem happens to be 1200x. Now, this significance is directly related to the way that we think about time when we consider the fact that the clocks on the hands on a clock, line up at both 12 o'clock and 6:30. Now, this light value has been around since presumably the Big Bang, and considering the fact that we didn't define the 12-hour clock system until 16th century AD, that means that, in fact, we pulled these values from some unknown source, because this experiment with lasers was definitely not around in the 16th century. What we also find here is that y is defined by x and is therefore metaphysical, so we can see that in this experiment there is absolutely no zero values. We have a source which produces light, we have a source of a triangle which is clearly a value, but there is no zero. So this also lays a good reason down for why we are currently finding that the laws of thermodynamics do not always apply. And also, considering this question over here, we must begin to wonder as to what in our minds is driving us to know things. And if in fact we do not have a God, then where did we get this information?